January 1st, 2007, New Year's Day, a Boeing 737 with 102 people on board takes off from Surabaya, Indonesia, heading north toward Manado. Routine domestic flight. Been done thousands of times on this route. Cruising altitude, 35,000 feet. Weather ahead, ugly. Thunderstorms sitting right across the Makassar Strait. And somewhere over that water, the aircraft simply vanished. No distress call, no emergency squawk, just gone from radar.
For 9 days, search teams found nothing. Not a seat cushion, not a life vest, not a single piece of evidence that 102 human beings had ever been airborne that afternoon. When they finally did find wreckage floating in the strait, the pieces were so small, so shattered, that it was immediately clear this aircraft had not gently ditched into the ocean. It had come apart, in the air. So the question became, what happened inside that cockpit? And more importantly, who was really responsible? The pilots? The airline? Or the system that let that aircraft fly in the first place?
I'm Ryan Mitchell, retired airline captain, 23 years in the cockpit, over 10,000 hours in type, including thousands training other pilots in simulators.
I have been through IRS malfunctions. I have dealt with autopilot disconnects at altitude. And I've studied this accident in detail because what happened on Atom Air 574 is one of the most important case studies in aviation about what happens when a system fails its crew before the crew ever fails the aircraft. Stick with me because by the end of this video, I'll tell you exactly where I land on this one. Not the safe answer, not the politically comfortable answer. My honest read after going through every available report and every piece of evidence. Fair enough? Let's go.
Before we go through the accident itself, I need to give you the context, because this story does not start at takeoff. It starts with the airline.
Atom Air was founded in 2002. It was a low-cost carrier launched during a period of massive growth in Indonesian aviation. Passenger numbers across the country had increased five-fold in less than a decade. New airlines were popping up everywhere. Atom Air was one of them. Co-founded by a businesswoman named Sandra Ang and Agung Laksono, who at the time was the Speaker of Indonesia's House of Representatives. The airline was named after Ang's son, Adam Suherman, who was appointed CEO at the age of 26. This was a family operation in every sense. Multiple family members held senior management positions. Now, why does any of this matter? Because the culture of an airline starts at the top, and the culture of Atom Air, as the investigation would later reveal, was built around growth, cost-cutting, and political connections, not safety, not maintenance, not training. I'll come back to this. The aircraft involved in Flight 574 was a Boeing 737-400, registration Papa Kilo 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 Whiskey. It was 18 years old at the time. Now, age alone does not make an aircraft unsafe. There are 737s older than that, flying perfectly safely right now. What matters is how the aircraft is maintained. And this particular aircraft had a problem. A serious, well-documented, completely unresolved problem. The Inertial Reference System, the IRS. For non-aviators, here's a quick explanation. The IRS is one of the most critical navigation systems on a modern commercial aircraft. It consists of gyroscopes and accelerometers that constantly measure the aircraft's position, attitude, heading, and movement in three-dimensional space. There are two independent units, one feeding data to the captain's instruments, and one feeding data to the first officer's instruments. When both agree, you know where you are. When they disagree, you have a problem. You need to figure out which one is lying. Now, here is the detail that changes everything about this accident. Pilot reports and maintenance records showed that in just the 3 months before this flight, between October and December 2006, there were 154 defects logged on this aircraft related to the IRS. Let me say that again. 154 defects in 90 days, on the same aircraft, on the same system. And what did Atom Air's maintenance team do about it? They cleaned the connections. They swapped the units between the left and right side. They reset circuit breakers. Essentially, the aviation equivalent of turning it off and turning it back on again. They never actually diagnosed the root cause. They never replaced the faulty unit, because ordering a replacement would take 6 months, and that apparently was not a priority. This was not a hidden problem. Pilots were writing it up flight after flight after flight, and yet the aircraft kept flying. The airline's management, according to the final investigation report, was not even aware of the seriousness of these recurring defects. They didn't have an effective reliability control program. It existed on paper, but not in practice. And the regulator, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the DGCA, Their most recent inspection of this aircraft was on December 1, 2006, exactly 1 month before the crash. They identified 21 airworthiness deficiencies, including unresolved IRS issues. No enforcement action was taken, so this aircraft was flying passengers with a known, recurring, unresolved navigation system fault. That's the starting point. Keep that in mind as we walk through what happened next. Now let's talk about the crew. Captain Refri Widodo, 47 years old, over 13,000 flight hours. That's a lot. First Officer Yoga Susanto, who had around 4,200 hours, also a respectable number. The captain had joined Atom Air roughly 6 months before the accident. He had completed a line check and a proficiency check, but according to the investigation, he had not completed the required crew resource management training at the time of the crash. CRM training, the exact kind of training designed to prevent exactly what was about to happen. Atom Air did not train its pilots on how to handle IRS malfunctions. They did not train them on unexpected autopilot disconnects. They did not provide upset recovery training, the kind that teaches you how to recover when an aircraft rolls past the normal flight envelope. None of it. These were not optional extras. These were fundamental survival skills, and the airline simply never taught them. The flight departed Surabaya at 1:59 in the afternoon local time. The route took them northeast, over the Makassar Strait toward Manado. It wasn't long before the IRS problem showed up again. The two navigation displays began disagreeing about the aircraft's position. A 28 nautical mile discrepancy between the captain's and the first officer's screens. That's significant. That means one system thinks the aircraft is in one place, and the other system thinks it's nearly 50 kilometers away. Someone is wrong. The autopilot, unfortunately, appeared to have been following the faulty system because the aircraft was already drifting north of its assigned route. Controllers in Makassar noticed. According to recordings from the control tower, one controller was heard saying words to the effect of, "Where is this flight going? He's flying north." Inside the cockpit, both pilots were now consumed with one thing: figuring out which IRS was correct. And this is where the first critical error began. Not an error of incompetence, but an error of priority. Both pilots were troubleshooting. Nobody was flying. CRM, Crew Resource Management, exists for exactly this reason. One pilot troubleshoots, the other one flies the aircraft. Monitor the instruments, keep the wings level, maintain altitude. That's the rule. It is drilled into every airline pilot from day one. But these pilots had never received that training from Atom Air. Their conversations on the cockpit voice recorder tell the story. They were increasingly agitated. Phrases like, "We can get lost if it keeps going like this. This is messed up. The FMS is confusing itself." They were trying to find the right procedure in the quick reference handbook. They found the IRS fault checklist. But here's the problem. The IRS fault light had not illuminated. There was clearly a fault, but the specific warning light wasn't on. So, did the procedure even apply? They weren't sure. They discussed it back and forth. At 2:54 in the afternoon, about 55 minutes into the flight, the controller noticed they were drifting further off course and instructed them to fly a heading of 70 degrees toward the Diola waypoint. At 2:55, the captain told the first officer to ask ATC for their current position. The controller told them they were 125 miles northwest of Makassar on the 307-degree radial. That information could have helped them determine which IRS was correct. It's not clear from the CVR that they ever used it. Now, this is where the timeline enters the final 2 minutes. And in aviation, 2 minutes is both an eternity and a heartbeat. Because what happened next took less than 120 seconds to go from a manageable problem to complete loss of control. The pilots decided to try a troubleshooting step from the QRH. They would switch the first officer's IRS from navigation mode to attitude mode. This is a standard procedure when one IRS is giving unreliable navigation data. You sacrifice the navigation function but keep the attitude information, pitch, roll, heading. But here's what this procedure requires, and this is critical. When you switch from MAV to ATT mode, the affected IRS reboots. During that reboot, the attitude indicator on that side goes blank. Several systems become temporarily inoperative, and the autopilot disconnects. The procedure in the handbook explicitly states that after switching, the crew must hold the aircraft straight and level for 30 seconds while the system realigns. At 2:56 and 36 seconds, the first officer switched his IRS to attitude mode. The autopilot disconnected. A loud warning horn sounded. Someone in the cockpit silenced the alarm within 4 seconds. But here's the chilling part. Neither pilot verbally acknowledged that the autopilot had disconnected. They silenced the alarm almost reflexively, like swatting away an annoying notification, and went right back to troubleshooting the IRS. Now, I want to explain what was happening to the aircraft at this moment, because this is where my experience as a pilot and instructor tells me this was survivable if even one of them had been watching the instruments. This particular aircraft, Papa Kilo Kilo Whiskey, had a known tendency to pull to the right, a slight aileron mistrim. The autopilot had been compensating for this the entire flight by holding roughly 5 degrees of left control wheel input. The moment the autopilot disconnected, that correction vanished. The control wheel returned to center. And with nobody manually holding left input, the aircraft began rolling to the right. Slowly, about 1 degree per second. 1 degree per second. At first, you wouldn't even feel it. In smooth air, you might not notice for several seconds, but they were in a thunderstorm. Turbulence, rain, reduced visibility. The instruments were the only reliable reference, and neither pilot was watching them. At 2:58 in the afternoon, the aircraft rolled through 35 degrees of right bank. The ground proximity warning system triggered. Bank angle, bank angle, bank angle, bank angle. That alert is loud. It is unmistakable. It is designed to get your attention immediately. The captain made a couple of small momentary corrections with the control wheel. The roll rate paused briefly, but he didn't sustain the input. He didn't commit to leveling the wings. He went back to the IRS, and the roll continued. Now some people hear this and ask, how is that possible? How can a pilot hear bank angle warnings and not level the wings? This is where spatial disorientation enters the picture. When you are in cloud, in turbulence, at night, or in weather, your body cannot reliably tell you which way is up. Your inner ear, your physical senses, they can lie to you. This is not a theory. This is established aviation physiology. Spatial disorientation has caused hundreds of accidents throughout aviation history. The only cure is training. Training to trust your instruments over your body. Training to fly by reference to the attitude indicator when everything else is telling you something different. Training that Atom Air never provided. Within 48 seconds of the first bank angle warning, the aircraft rolled past 100 degrees. It was essentially upside down. Losing lift, the nose dropped. The aircraft entered a steep, spiraling dive. Captain Widodo finally grabbed the control column and pulled back hard. But here's the thing that every upset recovery course in the world teaches you. When you are inverted and you pull back, you are not pulling up. You are pulling into the ground. The correct recovery is to roll wings level first, then pull up. But this crew had never been taught that. Nobody at Atom Air had ever put them in a simulator and shown them what an inverted dive looks like and how to get out of one. The aircraft was now plunging toward the ocean at a rate that defies imagination. The speed increased past the aircraft's structural limits. The cockpit voice recorder captured the overspeed clacker, that rapid clicking sound that means the aircraft is exceeding its maximum design speed. They reached Mach 0.926. The airspeed hit 490 knots. For reference, the 737's maximum operating speed is significantly lower than that. The aircraft was pulling 3.5 Gs in the dive. The first officer screamed, "Pull up, pull up, pull up." But it was far too late. At around 9,000 feet, the massive aerodynamic forces ripped the horizontal stabilizer off the aircraft. Two distinct thumping sounds were recorded on the CVR. The aircraft began to break apart in midair. The rate of descent reached 53,000 feet per minute. The black boxes stopped recording shortly after. The aircraft and everyone on board hit the Makassar Strait at a speed and force that left virtually nothing recognizable behind. Now, here's where the story should shift to accountability. And this is the part that genuinely frustrates me as a pilot. It took 9 days to find floating debris. The US Navy detected the black box signals within a few weeks. The recorders were sitting on the ocean floor at a depth of more than 2,000 meters. No country in Southeast Asia had the equipment to recover them from that depth. So the Indonesian government expected Atom Air to pay for the recovery. Atom Air refused. The airline's management did not consider finding the cause of the crash to be their responsibility. For 7 months, the families of 102 people waited while the government and the airline argued over who would pay to retrieve the recorders. 7 months. Families waiting for answers while bureaucrats bickered over a bill. Finally, Atom Air agreed to cover half the cost of 1 week of searching. 1 week. That's what 102 lives were worth to them. A U.S. deep-sea salvage company, Phoenix International, came in and located both black boxes within 5 days. They were found almost exactly where the signals said they'd be. The recorders were sent to Washington for analysis, and what the data revealed was the picture I just walked you through. A perfectly flyable aircraft, brought down because two pilots were left untrained, unsupported, and overwhelmed by a system failure the airline knew about and refused to fix. The final report was released on March 25, 2008. The KNKT, Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, concluded that the probable cause was the flight crew's loss of control after becoming preoccupied with troubleshooting the malfunctioning IRS, which led to the inadvertent autopilot disconnect, failure to monitor attitude instruments, spatial disorientation, extreme bank angles, and an uncontrollable descent resulting in structural breakup. Contributing factors: the airline failed to provide IRS malfunction training. The airline failed to provide upset recovery training. The airline failed to maintain an effective reliability program. The DGCA failed to enforce corrective action on 154 documented defects. The aircraft had a known aileron mistrim that contributed to the uncommanded right roll. Now here's where I want to be very clear about where I stand, because the title of this video asks a direct question. Pilot or ocean? Was this pilot error, or was this bigger than the two men in that cockpit? The official finding lists pilot error as a primary cause. And technically, yes. The pilots failed to monitor flight instruments. They failed to maintain control. They silenced the autopilot disconnect warning and didn't respond to it. They attempted an incorrect recovery when they finally realized they were in trouble. But I cannot sit here as someone who has spent 23 years in the cockpit and call this pilot error and walk away. Because these pilots were set up to fail. They were flying an aircraft with 154 documented IRS defects in 3 months. Defects the airline knew about and never properly fixed. They were never trained on IRS failures. They were never trained on autopilot disconnects. They were never given upset recovery training. The captain hadn't even completed his required CRM course. And the regulator who was supposed to catch all of this, the DGCA, inspected the aircraft 30 days before the crash, found 21 deficiencies, and did nothing. So when I hear people say pilot error, I hear the easy answer, the convenient answer. The answer that lets the airline and the regulator walk away clean. This is not a pilot error accident. This is a system failure. The pilots were the last link in a chain that was already broken long before they climbed into that cockpit on New Year's Day. And what happened after the investigation? Atom Air continued flying for more than a year after the crash. They had another serious incident just 51 days later, Flight 172, a 737 that hit the runway so hard during landing in Surabaya that the fuselage broke and the tail section collapsed. Then in March 2008, another Atom Air flight skidded off the runway in Batam, and the crew failed to deploy emergency slides during the evacuation. 3 serious incidents in roughly 14 months. The same airline, the same culture. In March 2008, the Indonesian government finally suspended Atom Air's operating certificate. In June 2008, the certificate was permanently revoked. The airline was dead. And then came the final detail. In August 2008, Sandra Ang, co-founder and owner of Atom Air, was arrested and charged with embezzling over $200 million from her own airline. That's not my claim. That's Indonesian police, on record. If even a fraction of that is true, it means the money that should have gone to maintenance, to training, to replacing faulty navigation units, was being siphoned out of the company while pilots flew passengers on aircraft they knew were broken. The crash of Atom Air 574, alongside other incidents, led to the European Union banning all Indonesian airlines from flying into EU airspace. It led to the United States downgrading Indonesia's aviation safety rating. It eventually triggered large-scale aviation safety reforms across the entire country. Those reforms have had real impact. Indonesian aviation is measurably safer today than it was in 2007. But those reforms came at a cost that should never have been paid. 102 people, 96 passengers, and 6 crew gone on New Year's Day because an airline cut every corner that mattered, and a regulator looked the other way. So, my verdict. 19 years later. Was it the pilots? In the narrowest technical sense, yes. They lost control of a flyable aircraft. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But was it the pilot's fault? No, not in any meaningful sense of the word. These were 2 men who were put into a cockpit with a broken system, given no training to handle it, and left to figure it out alone in a thunderstorm at 35,000 feet. The airline that was supposed to prepare them failed them. The regulator that was supposed to protect them failed them. The management that was supposed to ensure airworthy aircraft cared more about growth and profit than the lives in the back of those planes. If you want to know who is responsible for the 102 lives lost on Atom Air Flight 574, don't look at the cockpit. Look at the boardroom. Look at the maintenance logs that were ignored. Look at the training that was never provided. Look at the inspection reports that were filed and forgotten. And look at the $200 million that was allegedly taken out of the airline while its aircraft fell out of the sky. This accident is 19 years old. The airline no longer exists. The crew cannot defend themselves. But the lesson is not 19 years old. The lesson is today. Because every time an airline cuts training, every time a regulator looks the other way, every time a known defect gets deferred one more flight, one more week, one more month, the conditions that created Atom Air 574 are rebuilt. And the only thing standing between those conditions and the next crash is the willingness of someone in that chain to say, no, this aircraft does not fly until this is fixed. That's my read. If the evidence changes, my position changes. That's how this works. But 19 years on, the evidence is clear enough. This is Ryan Mitchell, and this is my side of the story. Take care.